No, I haven't. Good morning. My name is Richard Kubek. I'm Community Outreach Coordinator for Long Island Jobs with Justice and Flipping Hats. I'm also, can you hear me in the back? Okay. Can't hear me? Okay. How's that? Better? Okay. So I'm Community Outreach Coordinator for Long Island Jobs with Justice and Flipping Hats. I'm also Chair of the Welfare to Work Commission of the Suffolk County Legislature. I welcome you here, and I welcome our panel as well as we going to spend some time looking at new ways to get people out of poverty on Long Island. And I would say as an opener that poverty on Long Island is a bit of an oxymoron for most people. Poverty, Long Island can't be. 10 years ago, the Welfare to Work Commission observed, as many of us did, that poverty was growing at a faster rate in the suburbs than it was in the cities. And so the Commission held a series of hearings and focus groups to take a look at poverty and where it is. And I remember at the time, the presiding officer of the Suffolk County Legislature, to whom we report as a commission, African American, Dwayne Gregory, told us that he and his brother, twin brother, had scholarships to soccer scholarships. One of the Carolina colleges, renowned. And he said that when he got down there, and people found out he was from Long Island, they said, "What do you need a scholarship for? Everybody's rich there." And he said he spent 4 years explaining that Long Island isn't the Hamptons. And those of us who live here know that the Hamptons ain't what they're cracked up to be in terms of poverty. So, we have a struggle of sort of believing our own myth as a community, Nassau and Suffolk, that poverty is an oxymoron. And it runs very deep. To mark the 10th anniversary of our first report, we're doing another report. And we plan to release it in December of this year. We're very close to finishing it. And it's kind of instructive. This time, we decided to really dig into some of the structures that cause poverty to persist out here. And they run deep. And they run deep in our culture. And it was interesting because one of the people who testified, and we had, by the way, we had 83 people who participated in 11 hours of public hearings in May and June, submitted written testimony, and then we had 4 focus groups. So we've had 83 people, and there are some still sending in testimony. But one of the people who testified was a congregational minister, and he called upon, from his faith, the importance of caring and lifting up the poor, caring for and lifting up the poor. And I found that ironic. Oh, it's all. If I didn't have a cold, my teacher voice would be working. All right, we back on? So it was ironic because he's from the congregational tradition, and they grew out of the Puritans, and we all live with the Protestant or the so-called Puritan ethic, the work ethic, And years ago, I heard a really, really brilliant economist talk about the theological foundation of the Protestant work ethic, which comes from a narrow theological construct in Calvinism. And it goes like this. And I'm saying this because this cultural resistance to poverty is really deep. So the Calvinists had this sense, this belief, that an all-knowing God knows from the moment we are born, if not conceived, I guess, who's going to be saved and who is not, who's going to heaven and who's going to hell. And over the years, and I researched, this wasn't just one economist, this is sort of been researched. So over the years, the early Puritans
who were really committed to work, really profoundly committed to work, began to ask, the core question: am I saved or am I condemned? And they looked for signs. It's got to be a way that I know. And they figured it out. What does work produce? Wealth, money. And so as they evolved in Massachusetts and Connecticut, and then Tennessee and California, this idea that if you are wealthy, you are among what they call the elect. And if you are poor, you are among the condemned. So there aren't many people who would give that theological assessment today, but those values, that if you're rich, you're good, and if you're poor, you have done something wrong, is the deep cultural bias we're dealing with. And among our 83 people who testified, we had 29 in focus groups. Very hard at a public hearing in a legislative session in an auditorium to go up and say, hello, my name is Richard Kubek and I'm poor. So we had focus groups. And you see at the top of the handout, of the 29 people in focus groups, 19 in the year 2022 said, I'm too ashamed. They didn't use those words. They just said this: don't use my last name. The shame is deep. So, in that context, we began to put together what we were told. And structures emerged. And I'm saying this because now there are no headlines in what I'm about to show you. But we'll set a context for what we're going to hear today. Because we're here with our experts to look at ways of getting around these structures and these biases. So first we looked at, well, who is poor? Who are the poor? Pardon the expression, poor. And using two studies, the Sustainability New York State study and the so-called ALICE study, we looked at their results, and what they did was they plugged into family structures like a family of four. Let's pick this, a family of four with two preschoolers. That's the toughest family of the different combinations they looked at. What does it take to pay for the basic needs here on Long Island? So they plugged in Long Island cost of food, Long Island cost of housing, Long Island cost of childcare. And they came up with an astounding family of four, two preschoolers, $112,000 a year to pay for the basics. With kids a little older, it's a little less. So the range was between $85,000 and $112,000. That's incredible. The median household income is only $105,000. And we found in our research and listening to our experts, I'm following along now on this handout, we found that about a little less than half, about 48% of Long Islanders earn under $100,000 a year. That means about half of our households are trying to figure out how to pay the bills. And then we looked at the official poor. Who are they? And how does the government define poor? And the government definition of poverty, the federal poverty level, which is the same for every state except Hawaii and Alaska, so that the definition of poverty is the same for Suffolk County as it is for Selma, Alabama. There it is, folks, on page 2. $27,750 for a family of four. Meaning if you earn $28,000, you are officially not poor. In a region that requires $100,000 to pay for necessities. We have argued, as have many experts around the country as a commission, that you need to double that to define poverty. That the official definition for Long Island should be $55,000 for a family of four. That would be the poverty level. And when you read our stats, and you think of Dwayne Gregory, you're poor on Long Island, you need a scholarship. Our official poverty level is 6%, isn't that great? But if you give the real 200% of that 55,000, we're 20%, 1 in 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1 in 5 Long Islanders are poor. Amazing, amazing. So having established that baseline, we started looking at structures, and I'm going to go quickly because you know this stuff. We don't have housing for these people earning between 27,000, if not below, and 100,000. We don't have it. We found, for example, that at the current $575,000 Suffolk median to buy a house, using the standard formula that no family should spend more than 30% of their income on housing, you would have to earn $192,000 a year to buy a home. Yikes. Then we looked at rentals. Right now, the average rent in Suffolk is $3,470 a month for a 2-bedroom. That's it right now. Using that formula, 30%, you would have to earn $125,000 a year to afford a 2-bedroom apartment. This is our reality. These are the numbers. Then we looked at another structure. The intersectionality of housing and education. And you know this. We are among the 10 most racially segregated suburbs, not in New York State, in the United States. And we will hear about this, that takes a terrible, terrible toll on the children in the racially segregated communities. And we relied a great deal on a wonderful, powerful study released at the same time we were doing our hearings in May by Erase Racism that looked at the inequities in the funding of a community like Wyandanch, a block away from where I live in Half Hollow Hills. The funding for guidance counselors, the funding for AP programs, the funding for teachers of any kind. And then if you cross the street, Main Avenue, from Half Hollow Hills, where our graduation rate is 98%, you will find in Wyandanch it's 50%. 300 kids don't get out of Wyandanch High School. We also looked at disparities in healthcare. And what began to emerge is your zip code determines your future, it determines your health, it determines your family structure, it determines whether you get into jail or not, it determines the kind of work you're going to do or not do, and we found horrible disparities in healthcare. We looked at the chronic underfunding of childcare. $13,000 to $20,000 a year to have one kid in a child care center on Long Island. And while there's been an influx of money due to COVID, one of the few good things about COVID, vast amounts of money have come to local governments. It's going to run out. And that raises questions of what's going to happen to those working people between $25,000 and $80,000 a year who can't afford childcare. Do they give up work? What do they do? In fact, we found throughout the study, those folks who are struggling, 27 to 80,000, they're making Sophie's choices every week. Do I pay the rent, or do I go where? To the food pantry. 250,000 Long Islanders a year go to food pantries. We looked at the broken immigration system, the broken criminal justice system, all of which are derived from zip codes where you live, who your family is. And lastly, we looked at a number of areas of problematic laws, but one in particular are the welfare work rules. Let's go back to the Puritans. If you work and you become rich, you're saved. 1996, I woke up in August. I'm a Democrat, furious at Bill Clinton, who signed a bill that said it would reform welfare as we know it. by making people work. It's now how many years? And it has worked. Caseloads have gone down, and they have made people work in low-wage, poverty jobs, recycling them back in with very little opportunity for education and training. So we're going to look at some specifics. How do we get out of this mess? I was a teacher for many years, and I taught 11th and 12th grade history and government. I was talking to a friend of mine who was a special ed teacher, and I said, honest, how do you do it? That is really hard work. And she said, we're very incremental. Every day is a victory in many, many little ways. And I thought, yeah. However, there was a structural change several decades ago in which special ed was elevated, where kids were considered discipline problems. They now are recognized as having dyslexia. So there were structural changes that lead to incremental changes. So we're going to look at both today. We have folks on the panel who look at the big picture, the structures, and some who are going to talk about ways around those so we can think creatively of how to get out of you're a sinner if you're poor. So let me introduce our panel. I'm so glad to have them. We have Laura Harding, President and CEO of Erase Racism. Dr. Jeffrey Reynolds, President and CEO of the Family and Children's Association. Ian Wilder, he's the Executive Director of the Long Island Housing Services. Martha Maffei, Executive Director of SEPA Mujer, working on the ground with immigrant women. And Anthony Guerrero, Political Coordinator of the Sheet Metals Workers, and he's going to be talking about a project called Opportunities Long Island. So here we are, welcome everybody. I think we'll start with Laura. Our basic question is, how have you seen these structures, and how are you getting around them? Laura.
So as you know, Richard, Erase Racism really looks as an organization at the way structural racism and institutional racism plays out both on the educational front as well as the housing front. And so for us, what we've done, first of all, is conducted the research and issued and published reports that really highlight the disparities, the inequities, and the inequality. Second, we've built relationships with national and local coalitions to be able to do a level of advocacy such that we were able to have some of the policies changed. For example, allowing different kinds of income, like child support and alimony and things like that, to be considered in applications for housing. I think the third thing that Erase Racism has done well and will continue to do is our training and really educating Long Islanders, New Yorkers, and the nation around the impact that structural racism has, not only on people of color, Black and Latino people, but on white people. You are killing yourselves. I think it is hilarious that America thrives and talks about a Protestant work ethic for a country that was built on the backs of enslaved peoples. It is the biggest farce, but that is what we do with white supremacy. We create stories, and then we believe them, and then we get people who are most harmed to vote against their interests. And this is what you see on Long Island. So on Long Island, poverty, access to affordable and fair housing is couched in a color issue, and it is very much a racial, ethnic issue. But it also is very much a white issue. Your children can't come home and buy a home like they used to. They're not coming back here. We're not building the economy. They can't have that American dream of, I'll live with mom or live with my parents for 5 years and save the money for down payment and buy a home and have a family-sustaining career here. So Erase Racism seeks to really ask Long Island and New York State, when will you stop harming yourself, and when will you stop protecting and maintaining the white supremacist, structural racist policies and structures that are now harming you as well as those who look different from you.
Thank you. Why don't we go to Ian? Ian spends his every working hour, if not beyond that, trying to catch folks who are perpetuating the racial segregation. Go ahead, Ian.
Hi there. Is this on?
Yeah.
Okay. Hi, my name is Ian Wilder. I'm from Long Island Housing Services. We're an over 50-year-old civil rights organization focused on fair housing. As Dick mentioned, we do education and outreach, but if you've seen the Long Island Divided articles in Newsday, then you know the kind of testing we also do, because that's the only way to clearly see whether someone's discriminating or not. I want to echo some things that Laura said in terms of that the poverty structures, a lot of them that we have on Long Island, we found are founded in racist structures, such as our zoning structure, which prevents us from being able to build as much affordable housing as we need, because you got to say "Mother, may I" every single time, and there are quiet structures in the towns that prevent it. And the example that I've gone back to is in the 1619 project. They talked about after the Civil War, during the brief period of Reconstruction, they instituted education in the South for everybody. And before the Reconstruction was turned back, it was for everybody. But one of the biggest effects of that was poor whites got education for the first time. So if we attack the structures of racism on Long Island, we are also attacking the structures of poverty. And we can go through every single thing. We can go through school district lines. We can go through every structure that keeps people down on Long Island, and you will find over and over again that racism is often at its base.
Good. Okay, let's go to Jeff Reynolds. Dr. Reynolds, you're a big picture guy. You're a member of our commission. I've had been for years. What's your take on these
So
structures?
just to set the groundwork, FCA is an organization that's been around for 138 years. We run 40 different programs in 26 different locations at this point in time, serve about 30,000 people a year. So I think, we do it in a couple ways. One is the direct service provision that happens, and increasingly responding to some of the emergent issues here on Long Island, specifically the uptick in gun violence. And I'll say a bit about how we address that, because that's not in the typical way. The upswing in addiction and mental health issues, particularly among kids, and the upswing and the plight among seniors. Single largest fast and growing population of both Nassau and Suffolk are folks over the age of 80. Why? They can't leave. And so COVID really exacerbated poverty at the young end of the spectrum in terms of young people, young families, runaway and homeless teens. The midpoint, and that is the working poor, and then seniors. And if you thought poverty was an issue pre-COVID, it's far worse post-COVID, and look out for 2023, because I think it's going to get worse. We also make sure that we provide services. You talked a little bit about what it costs to live here on Long Island, and it used to be in the world of social work that you said to a social worker, here's a kid that's straight out of high school, transitioning out of foster care, help them find a job. And they would say, all right, we went down to McDonald's, we got them a job, we could check that box on to the next deliverable in terms of psychosocial development. Well, now you need 4 of those jobs in order to survive on Long Island. And so I've really reoriented all of our services to say, are we finding people living wage jobs that will allow them to be self-sufficient over the course of time? When I first got to FCA, and that's 8 years ago, one of our staff people told a story about how there was one family who had relied on us as a 138-year-old organization for 3 generations. And I said to her, please stop telling that story. It's fine that we've been there through that family's lifespan, and we should be, and we will be going forward. But we haven't moved them towards self-sufficiency. They're still banging at our door. We'll be there, we'll answer the door, but we got to do something differently. The third issue, and I testified to this during the hearing, when you look at the not-for-profit sector here on Long Island, and even if you X out the large hospital system that accounts for the vast majority of the not-for-profit employees, we're still a powerful economic force to be reckoned with, and there are tens of thousands of Long Islanders who work in this space. Yet they are among the least paid individuals when you line up any job function across Long Island. And case in point, I have had now 5 social workers, credentialed licensed social workers, leave FCA to go work in retail or go work for Amazon because A, they're gonna make more money, and B, they've said it's less heartache. I powered through COVID, I held the hands of families, I watched seniors die via FaceTime. I need a break from all this, and by the way, I'm gonna make a whole lot more money. And so as an organization, we affirmatively hire folks that are from the community that have struggled with the very problems we're talking about. When it comes to gun violence, the law enforcement response is all well and good, but we employ credible messengers in the village of Hempstead who have lived a life, who understand what's going on, who can go out in a way that I can't with my cop haircut and my suit jacket, right, and have a conversation about retaliatory gun violence. And so not only is it a better solution, but we're employing people, and we're not giving them like the old school, hey, we'll give you a stipend, you can be a volunteer. No, 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 you have an equal spot at the table in terms of decision making, in terms of compensation and everything else. The last thing I'll say is, you know, one of the things I testified at the hearing was the fact that last year we did an all-out push to get the legislature to add a cost of living increase for folks that work under state OASIS, the Office of Alcoholism and Substance Abuse Services, OMH, OCFS contracts, and everyone paraded it around, including the governor, saying it is a huge victory because after 10 years, we finally got the staff a 5.8% cost of living increase. That's awesome if the CPI isn't upwards of 8%. And so we have staff who were like, well, this is great. I haven't seen this much money in a long time, but I'm still having a hard time paying my bills. And the one-time healthcare worker bonuses, those two are awesome. But guess what? They disappear next year. It's no longer an election season. They're going to go away, and all of our staff, keep in mind our staff's 79% female, 66% people of color, have begun using that to pay their bills, to buy home heating oil deliveries, to buy groceries and everything else. And so as far as we've come, we need to really go further in terms of making sure that the folks that are the helpers, folks working in the not-for-profit sector, are compensated in a way that's fair and equitable and reflects the importance of what they're trying to do. Keep in mind, we have asked them and us to solve the region's and probably the nation's most vexing problems, right? Homelessness, poverty, illiteracy, violence has all been left to our sector. And so we've got to compensate them in a way that's fair.
Yeah, I remember 11 hours of testimony, and what Jeff said jumped out at me. I don't know if you remember saying this, but you said it takes 3 minimum wage jobs just to get out of poverty and basically, you know, struggle to get the least out of what you can do. Buried in your stats that I gave you is the typical salary for a child care worker is $15 an hour. These are teachers teaching kids prior to entering the public school system where 85% of their brain development occurs in the $15 an hour. So keep in mind that cultural bias. Now, why is it we're doing this? Because some people are going to go to heaven because they're rich, and some people are not because they're poor. I see Reverend Garner is here. I had to run the analysis of the Puritans by Reverend Garner. I said, am I being too tough on you guys? He said, do it. Anyway, let's get into some specific programs of what's happening. So, Martha, you're working directly with immigrant women and doing some fabulous things day to day. What you're doing